The wind howled bitterly through the Ozark Hills as snow continued to fall like endless white ash across the desolate landscape. Ayanna braced herself against the cold, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the small clearing outside the tiny log cabin she called home. Once, this place had been warm and full of quiet laughter, the home she built with her beloved husband, Keona. But now it stood silent, filled only with the echoes of memory and grief. Ayanna was a young Cherokee woman, barely 23 years old, with long raven hair and soft brown eyes that now seemed dulled by sorrow. Only a few months earlier, she had shared this cabin with her husband, who had been her childhood friend and the love she trusted with all her heart. Keona had been strong, kind, and full of dreams for their future. He had promised they would begin a small trading post in springtime, a place where both native travelers and settlers could trade peacefully. They dreamed of children, of peace, of shared sunrises. But the cruel winter came early that year. The sickness arrived like a thief in the night: fever, coughing, weakness, and before Ayanna could fully understand what was happening, Keona slipped away in her arms, leaving her alone in a frozen world that suddenly felt too heavy to bear. She buried him behind the cabin, marking his grave with stones and a freshly carved wooden emblem from his tribe, a symbol of journeying onward. She sang the morning songs of her people alone, her voice trembling, her tears staining the frozen earth. After his death, Ayanna spent days in silence, barely eating, barely sleeping. The grief clung to her like the snow on the trees, cold and crushing. Food supplies dwindled as the storm continued for weeks. Without Keona's strength and presence, each simple chore felt like lifting a mountain. She had tried to trade or seek help from nearby settlers, but the distance was far and the roads dangerous during these storms. Many settlers were unfriendly toward native people, and Ayanna feared being turned away, or worse. So she stayed, hoping the blizzard would pass. The winter, however, grew only harsher. Ayanna's small woodpile was almost gone, and the cold sneaked into every corner of the cabin. When she woke up one morning with her fingers half numb and her lips cracked from cold, she realized with dread that she wouldn't survive much longer unless she found food and wood. Her body, already weakened from grief and malnourishment, shivered violently as she wrapped herself in her worn wool blanket. She stepped outside into the early morning storm, snowflakes swirling around her like icy spirits. She stumbled toward the trees in search of whatever dry wood she could find. Each step felt heavy, and every breath burned her lungs. The world was quiet except for the moaning wind and the sound of branches cracking beneath the weight of ice. She whispered Keona's name under her breath as if it might give her strength. In her weakened state, Ayanna's vision blurred, and the world began to sway. She leaned against a tree, clutching a few sticks in her arms. The forest tilted before her eyes, and she sank to her knees in the snow. The cold seeped in, and she suddenly felt so tired. Her mind drifted back to memories of warmer days, the gentle creek behind the cabin where she and Keona used to fish, the laughter they shared while weaving blankets together. She remembered his voice telling her how strong she was, how she always found the light within any darkness. But now, with the snow swirling around her and her strength nearly gone, she wasn't sure that light still existed. Her fingers loosened around the sticks, and she sank deeper into the snow, shivering. Her breaths came slower and slower, and darkness pressed in around the edges of her vision. Ayanna whispered one last prayer in Cherokee to the Creator, asking that her spirit be reunited with Keona. If it was her time, then everything went still. She collapsed fully onto the snow, her dark hair spreading around her like a curtain, her shawl already dusted in frost. The forest stood silent, as if mourning with her. Unknown to her, miles away, a wealthy rancher named Silas Thornton was saddling his horse to search for missing cattle, unaware that fate was about to bring their paths together and that his own lonely, empty life was on the verge of being changed forever by a Cherokee widow slowly freezing to death in the hills. Silas Thornton urged his horse forward through the thick snow, the icy wind stinging his face as he scanned the ridge ahead. He was a tall, rugged man in his early 30s with broad shoulders, a dark coat, and stern blue eyes that rarely revealed emotion. As the owner of one of the largest ranches in the region, he was well respected and feared by some who only knew him as the silent, solitary rancher who kept mostly to himself. That morning, one of his ranch hands had reported a few missing cattle, likely scattered by the storm. Silas, unable to stay still within the walls of his grand but lonely ranch house, had saddled his horse himself and ridden out. Riding through the hills gave him a strange peace, even in the bitter cold. He didn't know why, but something inside him felt restless today, as though something unseen was pulling him toward the snowy wilderness. As he rode through the forest trail, he spotted something dark against the pure white snow near a thick cluster of trees. At first he assumed it might be one of his missing steers, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman sprawled motionless in the snow, her hair and shawl covered in frost. Silas's breath caught in his chest. He quickly dismounted, his boots crunching through the snow as he rushed to her side. Kneeling beside her, he saw her face, beautiful yet pale, almost blue from the cold. Her lips were cracked, her skin chilled. For a moment, he thought she might already be gone. But then, he saw the faintest flutter of her chest. She was still alive. "Hold on," he muttered, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he removed his thick overcoat and wrapped it around her shaking body. He lifted her gently into his arms, surprised by how light she was, as if sorrow and hunger had carved the strength from her bones. She murmured something faintly, words, in a language he didn't understand, Cherokee, though he didn't know it yet. Her eyes fluttered but did not open. Her head rested weakly against his chest. Silas didn't hesitate. He mounted his horse with her cradled in front of him, holding her close as he spurred the animal toward his ranch as fast as the snow would allow. Back at the ranch house, Silas burst through the door, startling the housekeeper, Mrs. Granger, an older woman who had worked for him since his childhood. The stable boy and 2 ranch hands followed him inside. "Good heavens, who is she?" Mrs. Granger gasped. "I found her in the northern hills," Silas said calmly but with urgency in his voice. "She's freezing and barely breathing. Get hot water, blankets, and anything to treat fever. Hurry." The staff immediately obeyed. Silas carried the young woman into the guest room closest to the large fireplace and laid her on the bed. Her clothes were soaked and icy, so Mrs. Granger helped remove them and covered her with warm blankets. A kettle of water was placed near the fire to heat, and Silas sat by her side, his brows furrowed in concern as he watched the faint rise and fall of her chest. Soon, they brought herbal salves and homemade tonics. Silas remembered a few remedies an old Cherokee horse trainer had taught him years ago about using willow bark for fever and pine needle tea to help with chest ailments. He instructed the staff to prepare a mix of warming herbs. As the fire crackled, he held her hand and gently called out to her, telling her she was safe. Hours passed. She remained unconscious but began to grow warmer. Silas never left her bedside. He didn't even send news to the town doctor, a white doctor who likely wouldn't care for an unknown Cherokee woman. Silas knew he could handle it himself, and he refused to risk her being mistreated. Mrs. Granger, watching silently, noticed the look in Silas's eyes, a rare mix of protectiveness and compassion. She had not seen that look since his youth, before life's tragedies hardened him. Years ago, Silas had been engaged to a woman named Eliza who died in an accident, leaving him heartbroken and distant from the world. To see him now caring so, intensely for a stranger, stirred something hopeful in the housekeeper's heart. As night fell, the woman's breathing grew steadier. Silas sat at her side, his hand resting lightly atop hers. She still hadn't woken, but her cheeks no longer looked icy and lifeless. Silas whispered quietly, more to himself than to her, "You're going to live. You have to." Though she was still between life and death, something had already changed in that ranch house. A storm had brought her to his doorstep, but fate, or something greater, had placed her in his arms. And without understanding why, Silas felt that saving her might just save some part of himself too.
The sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the guest room, casting a warm golden glow across the bed where Ayanna lay. For the first time in days, her sleep was peaceful rather than feverish. She slowly began to stir, her eyelids fluttering open. Her vision was blurry at first, but she saw the flicker of a fire, the softness of a quilt over her, and a distant sound of a kettle whistling tat. Confusion washed over her. She tried to sit up, but her body felt weak and heavy. She turned her head. She noticed a tall figure sitting beside the bed, a man with suntanned skin, dark tousled hair, and weary, gentle eyes. Must have been there for hours, resting, his elbows on his knees as he watched her sleep. When she moved, he instantly straightened and leaned forward. "You're awake," Silas said, relief flooding his voice. Ayanna blinked, the man's words echoing faintly as she fought to understand. For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes. Not knowing where she was, she tried to shift away from him, clutching the blanket to her chest. Silas noticed and gently raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe. I found you in the snow. My name is Silas Thornton." Ayanna's lips parted. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice barely came out. She tried to say her name Ayanna, but it came only as a whisper. Silas nodded and repeated it carefully, surprising her that he understood. He poured warm broth into a cup and helped her sit up slightly so she could drink. At first she hesitated, wary, but the warmth and the kindness in his eyes made her accept it cautiously. The broth soothed her throat and stomach. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Silas asked nothing about who she was or why she had been alone in the hills. He simply told her she needed to regain her strength. Over the next few hours, he brought her herbal tea and stayed close as the housekeeper changed the linens and tended to her. Ayanna was surprised by the gentle care she received. In her life, she had known cruelty and mistrust from some settlers, but this man treated her with a respect she didn't expect. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Granger entered the room with fresh linens and food. She introduced herself warmly and spoke to Ayanna in a slow, gentle voice, as though speaking to a frightened fawn. Ayanna whispered thanks in English, though her accent revealed her Cherokee origin. Mrs. Granger smiled kindly and said, "We're glad you're safe here." Over the next 2 days, Ayanna slowly regained strength. She remained quiet, speaking little, and often glanced away when Silas sat near her. Not out of distrust, but out of unfamiliarity and shyness. Silas, usually a man of few words, found himself speaking softly to her, telling stories of his horses, the land, and how he lost cattle in the storm, which led him to her. Never pried, never asked about her past, and somehow that silence made Ayanna feel more comfortable. One evening, as the fire crackled, Ayanna looked up at Silas and finally spoke more clearly. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "I didn't think anyone would care." Silas looked at her, surprised by the sadness in her voice. "No one should die alone out there," he said. "You deserve to live. You're safe. Here for as long as you need." Ayanna's eyes glistened with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She whispered, "Thank you." Even those simple words felt heavy with emotion. Silas gave a small nod and rose to stoke the fire, giving her privacy so she wouldn't feel embarrassed by her tears. Later, when she was alone, Ayanna looked out the window, seeing the ranch stretching toward snow-covered hills. She realized she didn't even know this man, yet something about this place felt strangely peaceful. She was still grieving for Kiona, her heart still aching with loss. But for the first time since his death, she felt warmth again, not just in her body, but in her soul. The ranch hands kept their distance, curious but respectful, having seen how fiercely Silas protected the mysterious woman. Some whispered rumors. Who was she? Was she dangerous? But no one dared question Silas directly. Inside the ranch house, Yana sat up in bed and watched Silas from the doorway as he quietly repaired a saddle by the fire. When he looked up and met her gaze, neither of them spoke. Yet in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile understanding, a quiet bond forming like a delicate blossom in winter's frost, though neither spoke of it yet, both felt it deep inside. Her presence had brought something back to life in this house. Perhaps healing was beginning for both of them. As days passed, Gianna grew strong enough to walk through the ranch house on her own. Silas had insisted she stay as long as she needed, and though she still spoke little, she began to settle into a rhythm. Mrs. Granger helped her find some clean, warm dresses left from a trunk of past relatives. They fit her modestly, and she wore them with quiet gratitude. Each morning she folded her blanket neatly and tidied the small guest room, careful to show respect for the space she had been given. Silas continued his routine of working on the ranch, checking livestock, managing ranch hands, and repairing fences damaged by the storm. But now, each day, he made sure to return to the house early, just to see if Ayana needed anything. Sometimes he brought her fresh bread or talked softly about the land. Every evening by the fire, he would sit and read reports or mend leather straps while she sat nearby sewing or simply staring into the flames in thought. Words were few, but there was comfort in their shared silence. One evening, snow began to melt, and a faint hint of spring touched the air. Silas invited Ayana to step outside with him. He helped her onto the porch where she could lean on the railing. The sky was painted with colors of orange and lavender across the horizon. Ayana wrapped a shawl around her shoulders as Silas stood beside her. "It's beautiful." She whispered. "Yes," he replied, then after a pause added quietly, "It's been a long time since I saw this place look beautiful." Ayana looked at him, understanding the hidden meaning behind his words, that until she came, everything had felt empty to him. She didn't know why, but his honesty stirred something warm inside her. She wanted to speak more, but her heart still felt heavy with the loss of her late husband. She wondered if it was wrong to feel any kind of peace or connection to another man so soon. A few days later, while Ayana was sitting near the stable, feeding a stray kitten she had found, two ranch hands approached. One of them, a younger man, named Carter, smiled kindly and asked if she was feeling better. The other, an older hand named Rob, did not greet her politely. He narrowed his eyes slightly and muttered that it wasn't safe or proper to keep an Indian woman on the property. Ayana lowered her gaze, not wanting conflict, but Carter glared at Rob and told him to mind his words. Was said, Silas appeared behind them, having overheard. His voice was firm, colder than the winter wind, as he warned Rob that disrespect toward Ayana would not be tolerated. Rob backed down, but not before giving Ayana a resentful stare that made her uneasy. Later that night at dinner, a simple meal of stew and bread in the warm dining room, Ayana hesitated before speaking. "Perhaps it is better if I leave soon," she said quietly, not meeting Silas's eyes. "Some of your men, they do not want me here. I do not want to bring trouble to you." At least set down his spoon. "You're not leaving," he said firmly, but gently. "This is my ranch. You are welcome here as long as you need, no matter what anyone else thinks." His resolve touched her deeply. She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "You have done more for me than I can ever repay," she whispered. "You owe me nothing," he replied. No one should face this world alone. For the first time, Ayana gave him a small, genuine smile, the first smile since she had lost her husband. It was faint but beautiful, and Silas felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. But outside the ranch house, rumors were spreading in town. Some townsfolk whispered that Silas had taken in a Cherokee woman. They speculated all kinds of things, that she was dangerous, that she was a witch, or worse. Some local men, including a spiteful traitor named Mr. Whitlock, decided to pay a visit to Silas to talk some sense into him. Unaware of these rising tensions, Silas and Ayanna spent the evening softly exchanging stories. She told him a little more about her late husband, about the songs her grandmother taught her. Silas shared that he once loved someone too, and lost her. The pain in both their voices ran deep, and though neither dared to say it aloud, they both felt a fragile, new hope beginning to bloom, despite the storm of conflict that was already gathering beyond the ranch fence. Several days had passed since Ayanna had first stepped onto the ranch porch to see the sunset. Silas had planned to ride into town to pick up supplies and check on news about the early spring thaw. Ayanna, now stronger and more comfortable around the house, offered to help Mrs. Granger bake bread in the kitchen. Silas saddled his horse and promised to return by dusk. Ayanna watched him leave, a quiet worry stirring in her heart she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just concern for his safety, it was something more, something just beginning to form, though she refused to name it yet. Trouble comes knocking later that afternoon. While Ayanna and Mrs. Granger were placing loaves to cool near the window, a shadow passed by outside. Then a loud knock came at the door sharp, commanding. Mrs. Granger answered, expecting it might be one of the ranch hands, but instead 3 men stood there. Ayanna recognized one of them immediately, Mr. Whitlock, a trader from town known for his rough temper and bigotry. 2 other men stood behind him, arms crossed, faces stern. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Whitlock said with a forced smile. "We're here to speak to Mr. Thornton. He's not home at the moment," Mrs. Granger replied dryly. "What's this about?" Whitlock's eyes shifted past her toward Ayanna inside the house, his expression twisted slightly with disdain. "We've heard he's harboring someone. Usual. We came to advise him that it might not be wise to keep a savage in his home." Folks are beginning to talk. Ayanna stiffened, her heart pounding. Mrs. Granger's eyes blazed with anger. "You will not speak like that in this house. Mr. Thornton saved her life. Now leave." Whitlock stepped forward, lowering his voice. "I'm doing him a favor. People are afraid. She could bring disease or worse. She might be scouting for her tribe to raid. If she stays here, she puts us all at risk." Ayanna felt a chill not from the cold, but from the old familiar sting of hatred. She gently placed the cloth on the table and took a step toward the door. "I have harmed no one," she said calmly. "I only survived." Whitlock sneered. "Maybe so. Or maybe you're just waiting until someone trusts you enough to strike." Mrs. Granger raised her voice. "Get off this property before Mr. Thornton hears of this. You know he won't stand for you threatening this woman." Whitlock scoffed. "He's blinded by pity. If something happens to him or his ranch because of her, don't say we didn't warn you." They left, but not without glancing back with cold, hateful stares. Ayanna's hands shook slightly as she closed the door gently. Mrs. Granger touched her shoulder. "Don't you listen to that vile man. Silas won't let anyone hurt you." But Ayanna's peace had been shaken. The encounter brought back memories of when her tribe had been pushed off their land. How settlers shouted through stones and called them savages, even as her people tried to live in peace. When Silas returned that evening, he noticed the tense atmosphere immediately. Mrs. Granger told him what had happened. His calm expression hardened with fury. "Whitlock crossed a line," he muttered. He went to find Ayanna. She was sitting on the porch again, her eyes distant, her hands folded in her lap. He sat beside her silently before speaking. "Heard? What happened? I'm sorry you had to endure that." She didn't meet his gaze at first. "They blame me for being alive," she whispered. "They think I bring danger simply by existing. I do not want to bring that danger to you." Silas turned toward her. "You are not the danger. Their hatred is. I won't let it drive you away from here." Ayanna finally looked into his eyes. There was no pity in them, only fierce protection and respect. She felt tears fill her eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow alone. She nodded slowly. "You saved me," she said softly. "I will not forget that." Silas gave a small, solemn nod. "And I'll keep doing it if I have to." That night, something changed again. The threat from outside drew Silas and Ayanna closer within. She helped Mrs. Granger prepare supper, and Silas insisted she sit with him at the table not as a guest out of pity, but as someone who belonged. They shared their first full meal together, with soft conversation and a quiet sense of unity. But Silas knew this wasn't over. As the fire crackled behind them, he thought silently about what he might have to do to protect her. And Ayanna, though still haunted by grief, felt herself beginning to trust this man more deeply than she thought she ever could again. The growing tension around the ranch finally broke one cold evening not long after Whitlock's visit. The air was still, but a heavy feeling lingered like a dark cloud. Even the animals seemed uneasy. Silas had added extra patrols around the ranch, instructing a few of his most trusted ranch hands to keep watch for trouble. But despite the precautions, something in his gut told him danger was getting closer. Ayanna tried her best not to show her worry, helping Mrs. Granger with evening tasks and staying inside once night fell. She had grown comfortable with the ranch house, the warmth of the fire, and the calm strength of Silas nearby. Yet memories of burning villages and raids from her past haunted her mind. She feared a repeat of that pain. Just after midnight, when most of the ranch was asleep, a distant shout echoed through the darkness. Then another. Silas jolted awake in his chair by the fire, where he had fallen asleep with a rifle across his lap just in case. He heard hoofbeats, the frantic gallop of one of his watchmen approaching the house. Silas stepped onto the porch as Carter, breathless and nervous, dismounted and called out, "Mr. Thornton, flames on the east field. Someone set the barn on fire." Silas's eyes hardened. He hurried back inside, grabbing his coat and rifle. Ayanna met him at the door, fear in her eyes. "The barn?" she whispered, horrified. "Stay inside," Silas said firmly. "Lock the doors." But Ayanna shook her head. "I can help," she insisted. "I know how to put out fire. We used wet blankets, sand, anything we had." Silas hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Stay close to me." The attack outside, the night sky glowed orange as smoke rose from the eastern barn. The ranch hands were already trying to put out a spreading fire. Horses neighed wildly inside the corral. A panic swept through the ranch yard. Silas and Ayanna rushed to the scene. A few men, Whitlock and his companions, were hiding at a distance. In the shadows, watching the chaos they had caused, they believed burning a barn would be enough to scare the woman away and teach Silas a lesson. But they didn't expect anyone to fight back so fiercely. Ayanna and Carter rushed to collect sand in pails while Silas shouted orders,
helping cut loose frightened horses so they wouldn't burn. Ayanna threw sand over flaming haystacks. Her
face streaked with sweat and ash, refusing to shrink back. Silas saw her determination and felt a surge of pride and fear for her safety. Suddenly, a gunshot rang through the air. One of Whitlock's men had panicked, seeing Silas armed, and fired a shot. The bullet missed Silas, but sent sparks flying on the barn wall. Ayanna screamed, dropping to the ground for cover. Silas turned with fury in his eyes. He fired back into the air, not to kill, but to warn. "Leave this land," he roared into the darkness. Several ranch hands ran forward, driving the attackers away. Whitlock, realizing his plan had failed and they were outnumbered, retreated into the trees with his men. After the flames, by dawn, the fire was finally out. The barn was badly damaged but not completely destroyed. Some supplies were lost, but no lives. Ayanna sat on the ground near a water trough, exhausted, her hands blistered. Silas came to her and knelt beside her. His coat was singed, and his face blackened from smoke. "You could have been killed," he said softly, his voice shaking more from emotion than fatigue. "So could you," Ayanna replied, looking at him with the same fierce honesty. Silas reached out and gently clasped her hands in his. "You are not leaving here," he said. "Not now, not ever. You're part of this ranch, part of my life." Ayanna's throat tightened. She looked down, then back into his eyes. "I never wanted to bring pain into your life," she whispered, "but you brought me back to life. You saved more than my body." Tears glimmered in both their eyes. Silas pulled her into an embrace, holding her against his chest as the first light of dawn touched the smoldering barn behind them. For the first time since losing Kiona, Ayanna allowed herself to cry in someone's arms. But it was not a cry of sorrow alone. It was one of release and new beginning. Mrs. Granger watched from the porch, knowing something had changed forever that night. Whitlock and men like him might still lurk, but what had been forged between Silas and Ayanna now was stronger than fear. And as the sun rose, the ranch workers gathered, ready to rebuild. Ayanna stood with them, side by side with Silas, both knowing that this was no longer just his ranch or just her hiding place. It was becoming their home. The barn had been rebuilt with the help of every ranch hand, and even Ayanna spent hours gathering wood, sweeping debris, and sewing new saddlecloths. The ranch had come together like a family, united by what had happened that night. Though fear lingered, there was also pride and unity. Still, news of the attack and Silas's unshakable protection of the Cherokee woman traveled fast. In town, gossip grew louder. Whitlock spread lies that she had brought violence and bad luck. Some believed him, some didn't. But the next phase of conflict was not from the white townsfolk, it came from Ayanna's own people. One crisp morning, while feeding the horses, Ayanna heard distant hooves. She turned to see 3 Cherokee riders approaching the ranch. Breath caught in her throat. Recognition spread across her face. Among them was her late husband's cousin, Enola, a stern but kind warrior of their tribe. She hadn't seen him since before Kiona died. Silas noticed her tense posture and came to her side. "You know them?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "They are from my village. They must have tracked me here." Enola dismounted and approached. Slowly, surprise flickering in his eyes as he saw her alive. "Ayanna," he said in Cherokee, "we thought you died in the storm. We found Kiona's grave." Ayanna's eyes filled with emotion. "I buried him myself. I nearly died too, until this man saved me." She introduced Silas to them. Enola studied Silas carefully, his gaze guarded but not hostile. "You saved her life," he said, in accented English. "For that, you have honor." Silas nodded respectfully. "She saved mine too. This ranch is her home now." Enola looked at Ayanna. "There are those in our tribe who think you abandoned us, that you left your people behind." Ayanna's voice trembled. "I never abandoned our people. I was lost in grief and nearly lost my life. If I had known you all were searching, I would have tried to return. But now, I do not know where I belong." The other 2 Cherokee nodded silently. Enola softened. "You belong where your heart is," he said quietly. "Yes. If this place gives you peace, you are still one of us. Some of the elders may resist, but I will speak for you." Tears welled in Ayanna's eyes. Silas watched with quiet respect, understanding that this moment was sacred for her. She clasped Enola's hands tightly. "Thank you," she said. An invitation and a threat the Cherokee left peacefully, promising to return, to bring elders to speak with Silas and ensure peace. But as they rode away, another kind of visitor arrived in town. Sheriff Malden, stern lawman with a badge and a neutral reputation, rode to the ranch by afternoon. He wasn't hateful like Whitlock, but he brought official warning. "Silas," he said, dismounting with caution. "The townsfolk are nervous. Some men plan another attack. I can't stop everything that happens outside city limits. If you continue to keep her here, you may have more than just a barn fire next time." Silas stood tall, his voice firm. "Oh, she is staying. Anyone who tries to hurt her or this ranch will answer to me." The sheriff sighed. "You've always been a good man, Thornton. Just be prepared for what's coming." Before he rode away, he tipped his hat toward Ayanna as a sign of respect. It was small, but it meant not everyone in town wished her harm. A turning point that evening, after sharing the news with Mrs. Granger and the ranch hands, Silas and Ayanna walked together outside to the rebuilt barn. The sky was streaked with pink and blue. Ayanna spoke first. "My people will come soon. They will want peace, not conflict," she said. "But the town, they may not accept me." "Hey." Silas turned to her. "I don't care what they accept. Is your home so long as you want it to be?" Ayanna looked at him with deep emotion. "I want to be here," she whispered, not just as someone you rescued, but as someone who wants to live again. With you. Silas's eyes filled with tenderness. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. For a long moment they stood there, the world quiet around them. Then slowly she leaned up and pressed a soft, hesitant kiss to his lips. The first sign that her heart had started to mend, and that she was allowing herself to love again. Silas kissed her back, careful and gentle. When they pulled away, she felt a peace she hadn't felt since before Kiona's death. This was not forgetting her past. This was creating a new beginning. But both knew the peace was fragile. A meeting between the Cherokee and the ranchers was coming, and it could lead either to harmony or to war. The next week brought both hope and danger as two groups prepared to arrive at the ranch. One group was expected, a delegation of Cherokee, elders coming to meet the man who had sheltered Ayanna. The other was uninvited, several townsmen stirred up by Whitlock, determined to force Silas to give her up or face consequences. Silas prepared the ranch yard carefully. He set up benches outside the house, in the open space under the oak trees. Mrs. Granger brewed tea and baked fresh bread to show respect to the Cherokee elders. Ayanna helped arrange furs and blankets for seating, her hands trembling with anxious anticipation. Her heart pounded not only because her Cherokee elders were coming, but also because she knew there could be violence if the townsfolk arrived at the same time. Silas remained calm, but fully armed. He had stationed Carter and two loyal ranch hands at the perimeter, just in case. The ranch, once a place of isolation, was now a meeting ground of cultures. It's possibly a battlefield. The Cherokee elders arrive around midday. The Cherokee delegation arrived on horseback. Enola led them. And beside him rode an elderly woman named Naya, a respected healer, and an elder named Chaska, serious and wise. Ayanna greeted them with a bow of respect. They showed her kindness, expressing their relief that she was alive and safe. They then turned to Silas with quiet curiosity. Naya spoke first in English with a calm dignity. "You saved one of our own. We thank you." Silas nodded and offered them tea and bread. Sat beneath the oak, as Silas explained how he had found Ayanna and protected her. The elders listened intently, noting the respect he gave her every time he spoke. When Ayanna spoke, she proudly said, "He treated me as equal, not as a burden. He gave me back my life." Chaska glanced between them, seeing the bond that had formed. "The tribe will not declare you a traitor for staying here," he said gently to Ayanna. "You were lost in grief. Now you have found a new path. As long as the man honors you and your people, we will not oppose your union." Silas glanced at her in surprise, but with warmth. Ayanna felt tears of relief. A quiet blessing seemed to settle over them. Then the townmen appeared, but before they could finish their peaceful discussion, a dust cloud appeared near the ridge. Several riders approached armed white townsmen, Whitlock at the front. Silas tensed immediately. Nola stood protectively near Ayanna. Cotter, on the other hand, stepped forward, ready to defend. Whitlock didn't hide his anger. "So now we've got a whole tribe meeting on Thornton's land," he sneered. "This isn't your reservation. This is white territory." Chaska stood slowly. Naya and Enola flanked him, calm but firm. "It's not your home either," Chaska said coldly. "We came in peace to see our relative. We mean no harm." Whitlock turned to Silas. "You've turned this ranch into a camp for Indians? You're putting all of us in danger. If you don't send her away, we'll burn everything you own." Silas moved in front of Ayanna, rage in his eyes. "You've burned my barn once, and you'll never get that close again, if you threaten any. Of us, you're the criminal, not her." The Sheriff Malden, who had followed the townsmen to keep the peace, finally arrived and stepped between them. "Enough," he shouted. "There's been no crime but the one against this ranch. If anyone raises a gun, I'll arrest the lot of you." Some men wavered as the sheriff glared at them. Silas then spoke loudly for all to hear. "Ayanna is under my protection. She is my guest, and soon she may be more. If any of you harm her, or any Cherokee on this land, you'll answer to me in the law." Whitlock spat on the ground, but saw the sheriff's hand resting on his revolver. Realizing he was outnumbered and losing support, he finally growled, "This ain't over," and rode off, his few remaining followers behind him. Unity and promise once the threat was gone. Silas turned back to the Cherokee elders. The tension eased. Chaska nodded in approval. You stood for her with courage. "We will tell our people that you are an honorable man. If there is ever a dispute between your town and our tribe, let it be settled not with fire but with dialogue." Naya stepped forward and touched Ayana's hand gently. "Your heart has chosen. Follow it without fear." As evening came, the Cherokee delegation shared a meal with the ranch folk for the first time. They ate, spoke softly, and even laughed. It was not just a fire that had been put out, but the first spark of peace between two worlds. That night, Silas and Ayana stood together under the stars. Silas softly took her hand. "They accept us," he said quietly. Ayana nodded, her heart full. "And I accept you," she whispered, "if you will have me." He pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "Always," he replied. "And for the first time." The ranch felt not like a lonely man's property, but like the beginning of a real home for both of them. And, maybe one day, family. The tension that had once wrapped around the Thornton ranch like a tight coil slowly began to loosen. Word spread in town that the Cherokee had met peacefully with Silas, and that the sheriff himself had warned the troublemakers to keep their distance. Whitlock, humiliated and losing his hold over the townsfolk, stopped stirring conflict for now. And as spring warmed the land, even the people who had been wary of Ayana began to see the truth. The ranch was thriving, not suffering, because of her presence. Ayana continued to work alongside the ranch hands, tending to animals, helping Mrs. Granger, and planting early seeds for a vegetable garden. She even began teaching Silas a few Cherokee words, smiling when he mispronounced them and laughed softly over how patient she was with him. Their bond grew deeper, no longer just a connection of gratitude and protection, but of genuine affection and companionship. One morning, Ayana woke earlier than usual. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside into the quiet dawn. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft gold. She walked to the small hill behind the barn where wildflowers had begun to bloom. There she knelt in the grass and placed a few stones in a small circle, a quiet memorial to Kiwana, her late husband. She whispered a prayer in Cherokee, but instead of grief alone, she felt peace. She didn't feel like she was betraying him, only honoring what he had meant to her, while also allowing herself to live on. Silas approached quietly from behind, but stayed a distance away, telling her the moment.
Ollie.
After she stood, she turned. To him, he waited, not speaking. She stepped toward him, her face calm and clear. "He will always be a part of me," she said softly. "But my heart has room for more. For you." Silas's eyes softened, and he held her hands in his. They walked down the hill together in silence, knowing that something important had just shifted. A gathering of two worlds later that week, something unexpected happened. Several Cherokee riders returned, not in protest, but in peace. They brought gifts of woven blankets, handmade tools, and even seeds. They wished to honor the man who saved Ayana, and to show good faith between tribe and ranch. Mrs. Granger prepared a heartfelt meal. Soon the ranch yard filled with conversation and laughter in both English and Cherokee. One of the ranch, Hans Carter, shyly offered one of the tribe's young women a fresh-baked bread roll, which made others chuckle. For the first time, the ranch buzzed, not with fear of conflict, but with simple community between cultures that had been divided for so long. Even Sheriff Malden visited to see the new harmony firsthand. He tipped his hat to Ayana and told Silas, "There hadn't been a report of trouble in days. Looks like peace came quicker than we expected," he said, almost smiling. Silas nodded. People just needed to see that kindness is stronger than fear. The sheriff glanced at Ayana. "He did more for this land than most lawmen ever could," he said with quiet respect before riding off. A proposal of a different kind as evening settled and most guests had gone. Silas and Ayana sat on the porch. The sky burned orange as another sunset spread across the land. Silas took a small wooden box from his coat pocket and opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring. "It belonged to my mother," he said. "I kept it all these years." I always hoped I'd give it to someone who makes life feel whole. Again, Ayanna covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Silas looked nervous for the first time, but he continued, I won't ask until you are truly ready. But if you choose, I would be honored for you to wear this, something more than a symbol of gratitude. She touched the ring gently. I am ready, she whispered, her voice steady, her eyes bright with emotion. Not just to stay, but to belong with you. Silas placed the ring on her finger, his hands trembling slightly. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as night fell around them. The ranch house behind them glowed with lantern light and the sounds of gentle laughter from inside. A new future in the days that followed. People from town began to soften. Some even came to trade goods with the Cherokee or to buy wool blankets. From Ayanna, children played by the stream, while ranch hands and tribe members shared jokes and stories. It was a quiet revolution, not written in law, but in kindness. Ayanna no longer wondered where she belonged. The land, the tribe, the ranch, and Silas, all were part of her life now. Woven together like the blankets her grandmother once made, she had survived the harshest storm and found not just protection, but a home and a partner to share the future with. Spring had fully arrived by the time Silas and Ayanna decided to hold a small wedding ceremony at the ranch. It wasn't a grand celebration with fancy decorations or church bells, but something far more meaningful. A blend of Cherokee tradition and frontier simplicity created a moment that felt sacred, pure and true to both of their hearts. The ceremony was held under the large oak tree near the barn, its branches newly green with leaves. Ayanna wore a simple white dress stitched with embroidered tribal symbols at the hem her people's blessing. Around her neck, she wore a beaded necklace given by Naya, the Cherokee elder who had blessed their union. Silas stood tall beside her, dressed in a clean white shirt, dark vest, in the same quiet humility that had always defined him. The preacher from town, kind minister who respected both cultures, stood before them. Cherokee elders joined the ranch hands, and a few open-hearted townsfolk who had grown to respect Ayanna. Even the sheriff attended, offering his silent affirmation. Mrs. Granger wiped tears from her eyes as Ayanna and Silas exchanged their vows, speaking words of devotion and loyalty rather than a grand feast. They shared bread, venison stew, and sweet berries provided by both the tribe and ranch workers. Laughter and music filled the air. One ranch hand even played a fiddle while Cherokee drums echoed softly. For the first time, cultures that once feared each other shared a single, joyful table. Ayanna's new home after the guests left, and the sun fell behind the hills. Ayanna and Silas walked hand in hand toward the quiet porch. Fireflies sparkled in the dusk, and the warm scent of wildflowers filled the breeze. Ayanna looked around, remembering the night she'd first arrived, half-frozen, broken-hearted, believing she had no place left in the world. Now, she stood by Silas's side as his wife. No longer a stranger or a widow, but a woman with a future. Silas looked at her with deep admiration. From the moment I saw you in the snow, he said quietly, I felt like my life was being given a second chance. Ayanna reached up, brushing his cheek with her fingers. Dad! You gave me a second chance too, she whispered. You saved me in ways I never thought possible. They shared a tender kiss beneath the stars, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the ranch, the soft clucking of hens, the distant whinny of a horse, and the gentle creak of the porch swing. Moving forward together in the weeks that followed, Ayanna took on a more active role in the ranch. She taught Silas and the ranch hands how to use various healing herbs, while Silas taught her more about ranch management. She even began helping manage trade between the tribe and settlers. It's becoming a bridge of peace and understanding between both worlds. Whitlock and his followers, after being firmly confronted and losing support, retreated from their cruelty, though. Some prejudice lingered in town. Respect for Silas and Ayanna slowly grew. What people once feared, they now admired. The strength of a Cherokee woman who survived the storm, and the honor of a rancher who protected her without hesitation. Mrs. Granger built a small cradle in the corner of the living room, not out of pressure, but out of hope. Silas blushed when he saw it. Ayana smiled shyly. Though they had not spoken aloud about children yet, the idea of a future family felt natural, like the next beautiful chapter waiting to be written. A legacy of love one. Evening, Ayana and Silas sat with Enola and Naya by the fire. Candles flickered, casting soft light across the room. Enola spoke of the tribe's stories and traditions, and Silas listened with respect. Naya shared an old Cherokee saying, "Even in the coldest winter, the seed of love can grow, Ayana." And Silas exchanged gentle smiles. That was exactly what had happened. Their love had grown from despair and isolation, nurtured not by wealth or status, but by kindness, loyalty, and sacrifice. Final scene: as summer approached, the ranch flourished. The fields were green, the barns full, and the house filled with life. On a warm evening, Silas stood with his arm around Ayana's waist as they looked out over the land. "This place is different now," he said softly. "Yes," Ayana agreed, her hand resting on her stomach, gently hinting at the new life beginning within her. "It is no longer a place of loneliness and loss. It's a home of hope." Silas kissed her forehead. "Everything we went through, it was worth it to reach this moment." Ayana leaned into his embrace as the sky turned golden. Together, they watched the horizon, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, because a wealthy rancher had chosen to save a dying Cherokee widow and, in returning her life, she had saved his soul in return.